Hi guys, how are you? Today we are going to cover one important question which we are facing in interview as a backend developer of any language, but in our case we are going with Python. So what is a database and what are some examples of databases commonly used in Python backend development? A database is a collection of data that is organized in a way that enables efficient storage, retrieval, and modification of that data. In Python backend development, some examples of databases commonly used include mysql, PostgreSQL, SQLite, and MongoDB. Next, how do you connect to a database using Python? To connect to a database using Python, you first need to install the appropriate database driver for the database you are using. Then you can use a library like mysql-connector-python for PostgreSQL or mysql-connector-python for MySQL to establish a connection to the database. Here is an example of connecting to a PostgreSQL database using mysql-connector library of Python. So let's see how we create a connection with database PostgreSQL. Code Python code to connect to a database PostgreSQL. First we need to import mysql library after installing it. Then when we create a connection with connection parameter host, database, user, and password. This is the connection variable. On the next line, we are going to call cursor function to create a connection with database. After that, we are executing a query of MySQL PostgreSQL. Here we are by using the cursor variable. Code.execute is a function. In execute function we are passing an argument in double quotes. In this case we are passing select asterisk means all from my table which is in the database. Here we are selecting all the data from my table, so we are giving this argument to execute function. After that we are fetching all the rows from database by executing this query. Call.fetch all, we are fetching all the rows from database, all the records of database, like 10 rows of database. So we are fetching all those 10 rows and store in the rows for next procedure. Next, we are using for loop to print row of database table, my table, one by one. So that's why we are using for loop here. For now, for row in rows, this rows we are going to print all the rows from this my table, and after that we are print row one by one. After that we are closing a connection with database. Here This is the important step to close. After using the database, we have to close the connection of database. Next, we, we understand with explanation of this code. This is an example of connecting to a PostgreSQL database using the mysql-connector-python library in Python, retrieving all the records from a table called myTable. See here, from myTable. Okay. So next we are and printing each record to the console using this code to printing all the rows on the console. Here is a breakdown of what each line does. We are seeing what this code does. So we are breaking all this code step by step to understand what we are doing here. Import mysql-connector-python. This imports the mysql-connector library, which is a PostgreSQL adapter for the Python programming language. Okay. Next, con is equal to mysql-connector-connect. This establishes a connection to the database. In our code, you can see it clearly. We are passing some arguments to this function for creating a connection. These three dots means arguments which we are using to connect the database, like host name, port number, and something. This establishes a connection to the database with the specified credentials. Replace localhost, my database, my username, and my password with the appropriate values for your database configuration. Understand this again. Replace localhost, my database, my username, and my password, which we are defining in our code. You can see it here. You can replace it with your own credentials. Okay. Appropriate values for your database configuration. Which values of your database configuration, like your localhost is localhost, my database is my DB, yes, something else, my username, like in your case you are using username, just username, and my password. On this place you are just like using password. So change this, keep in mind, change these to your configuration values. Okay. Next, call is equal to con.cursor. We are calling cursor function. This creates a cursor object, okay, which is used to execute SQL statement on the database. This creates a cursor object. Here you can see it. This line of code creates a cursor object which is used to execute SQL statement on the database. Why we are create a cursor object? For SQL statements on the database, to execute SQL statements. Next, code.execute, select all from my table. This execute a SQL statement to select all records from the my table. Rows equal to code.fetch all. This retrieves all records returned by the select statement and stores them in the rows variable. Okay. Next, for row in rows, print row. This iterates over each row in the rows variable and prints it to the console. This is the rows variable. we are iterating for each row in the rows variable, this variable, and print it to the console. That's why we are using for loop here. On the next line, con.close, this closes the database connection.